U.S. President Donald Trump is hosting Presidents Felix Tshisekedi from the DRC and Paul Kagame from Rwanda to ratify a U.S.-brokered peace deal that was signed by their foreign ministers in June. Let's take you now live to Washington, D.C. All right, let's take a look back now on stories making international headlines. And of course, for more on this and staying with the story on Rwanda and the DRC, let's now bring in our international correspondent, Sophie Mukwena. And she joins us now in studio. And Sophie, we do know that a number of us have been waiting to see the situation in Washington, D.C. And of course, this follows the signing of that peace agreement.
Well, you are correct. We know that in June, the foreign affairs ministers of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo did sign that agreement in Washington. We saw a continued engagement in Doha, in Qatar, where there you had Rwanda, DRC, including the M23 rebels. Now, we know that President Trump had indicated earlier on that the signing ceremony will also include discussions around economic interest. We know that the United States of America wants the rare minerals, and we know that a country like the DRC has got lots and lots of rare minerals. Therefore, we expect that during that signing ceremony, a document that's likely going to be released as a final document will also include the agreement in terms of issues related to trade and investment between United States of America and the two countries. Now, when you listen to the voices of Africans based on what's likely going to happen today, the big question is whether this will lead to a lasting solution, because you are going to have two countries, Rwanda and the DRC, but you are not going to have other forces that are part of a problem in the DRC. And you have many armed forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo, not only the M23 rebels. And therefore the question is, unless you bring all stakeholders at the table and they all agree as Congolese in terms of the way forward, but also send a message to neighbors, to the continent, to the regional organizations, to the world, what must happen, you are not going to have a lasting solution to the current problem in the DRC. As we speak, we know that earlier in the day, those fighting continued in the eastern part of the DRC, where the M23 rebel is fighting with the government forces supported by Burundi, and Burundi is not part of the talks. And therefore, this is a very, very difficult one, and that is why Africans on the continent in the diaspora are saying any peace process that excludes all stakeholders, and it's not from the African continent, is going to fail, because it's not the first time Rwanda and the DRC signed an agreement in 2002 to 2003, Sun City talks, and then that signing ceremony in Pretoria, where President at that time, Thabo Mbeki, and the Deputy President, Jacob Zuma, were there, and also a representative from the United Nations on behalf of Kofi Annan were, you know, all in the room. We saw those visuals of the then President Joseph Kabila and also the current president of Rwanda, who was already the leader at that time, President Paul Kagame, signing that agreement. And therefore, people are saying what has changed. And if that was violated, and today there's a conflict in the eastern part of the DRC, them signing again, Rwanda and DRC, leave the individuals or the leaders, those countries signing again. They signed in Pretoria, they are signing again. what guarantee do we have that this time around peace will hold?
Certainly, Sophie. And let's move on to other news making international headlines. We also know that Chinese President Xi Jinping, as well as the French Emmanuel Macron, and he is in China for 2 days. And maybe if you can just give us, what does this signal when it comes to multilateralism, also at a time where trade tension is high?
When you look at the outcome of their meeting earlier today, we saw a report that both leaders have agreed that multilateralism must be respected and is the only way to go to resolve any issues around the world, linking it with the current trade war that was started by the United States of America by imposing tariffs against many countries around the world, including the very same France and China, the two leaders meeting today. Now, secondly, something to note there. You would recall a few days ago, 2 weeks ago, South Africa hosted the G20 summit. The declaration is quite clear. That's the main issue in the declaration, to say, as members of the G20, we are going to push for respect of international law and multilateralism. Now, President Emmanuel Macron was in that room. He was part of that decision. Multilateralism, a key. Yes, President Xi Jinping was not there, but a high-powered delegation from China was in the room. In other words, they are part of this. So I guess even behind the scenes, they did discuss those outcomes. And that is why we saw today the two leaders emphasizing multilateralism. And therefore, I think the negotiators of the declaration led by the South African Sherpa will be happy to see that the content of the declaration is already finding expression by member states and sticking to it. Therefore, there's continuity, taking it even bilateral with each other. And therefore, yes, tension on US, but, work is continuing. And therefore, also you see a situation where countries that have experienced the hostility, trade hostility from the US, going it alone in terms of bilateral and looking for alternative markets and making new friends. That speaks to change of balance of power, but also the issue of unipolar phased away and multipolar taking root, including at the trade level.
And so before I let you go, another story I want to talk about is, of course, Vladimir Putin, Russian president. He is in India. What do we know about his visit to India?
This is an important one. You know that when Russia was isolated by European countries, Russia had to look for other countries to strengthen the relations. And Russia did focus on the BRICS member countries, and therefore, much as there were relations, but it did escalate the relations. And we saw one country that was on the table in terms of the discussions in Moscow was India, because India is a powerhouse when you look at the population and currently the development, and you also have China. And therefore, the visit of President Putin in India comes very handy. Already there's strong trade relations on issues that include oil and gas, and them agreeing to do business or trade in their own national currencies. We know that America did warn India about that, but India is not backing off. It's looking at its own interest, and India emphasizing that it doesn't have enemies and it will continue to do business with any country that's willing to engage in a diplomatic trade engagement, and Russia is doing that. This is very important because these are two BRICS member countries, not only BRICS member countries, G20 members. So you can imagine behind the scenes with all the tensions, South Africa being isolated by US as it relates to the participation at the G20, off the glare of cameras. These are some of the issues the two leaders will discuss, because one G20 member country, who is also a member of BRICS, a loyal member, and also the South-South leader as it relates to IPSA, because currently President Ramaphosa is the chairperson of IPSA. He has taken over the reins from BRICS. And therefore, these are important formations and coalitions and alliances. And these issues will be discussed in terms of how do we respond, how do we do it. It might not be in the glare of cameras or in public spaces, but behind the scenes, there's no way the BRICS member countries, the IPSA member countries, India, Brazil, the South-South countries that are so many, and the G20 members who supported the declaration will not make their intentions known in terms of what we are witnessing right now.
Sophie, thank you so much for that update. That's SABC News specialist correspondent there, Sophie Mokoena, just giving us a wrap of news-making international headlines.